Well, hey, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started, and I'm sure some folks will come in, or if you need to leave because I'm just boring, you can do that too. So, hey, this is 10 Emerging Realities, and I'm not a guru. I'm not like a futurist. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not into that sort of stuff. But I'm going to share over the next probably 60 minutes 10 sort of observations we've learned as a mid-sized church, larger church in the Northwest in terms of the West Coast, but mid-sized church in terms of the United States as a whole, and realize the realities that I'm going to be sharing here is through the perspective of a lead pastor. And I asked our team to share some of these as well, and they're like, yeah, that was it. So not a whole lot of like deep research there, but certainly some applied hands-on lived experience. So let me pray.
Is PowerPoint going to be available?
Yes, we'll upload this to a website in about 15 minutes after the session's over, and we'll be good. All right, so let's pray. God, thanks for waking us up and for another morning, a little chilly morning, at least here in Phoenix. And we thank you for another day where we can live and learn and have joy. And that is my prayer today, is that we would have joy even in the midst of change. Lord, give us your spirit and pour that out so that we can gain some insight into what you might be doing here today. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. This will be up later, so you can give me a call. Just a little bit about me. This is my wife, Beth. We've been married for 17 years now, which is kind of strange because I still feel young, but we're now teenagers and old. So, yeah, and we have 3 kids, 3 boys. Ethan there's in the middle, he's 11. Noah is 8. Jonah is 5. And if I look a little tired there, it's because I'm jet lagged in that picture pretty bad. This is part of the ministry that we do. We experienced a pretty big shift in our community over the last year and a half, really, because the rent moratorium ended. I don't know how many of y'all live in a place where you have a lot of rental properties, but when that rent moratorium ended in the Seattle-Tacoma area, we had a massive move out and a massive move in, and the people who moved in were radically different than those who moved out. And so, as you can see, there's not a lot of white people in this picture, and so we've had to learn what it means to do multiracial, not necessarily ethnic, though there's some ethnic overtones there, ministry. And so we get to continue to pack in backpacks and food and all that stuff. We're actually in the middle of a building program right now to expand some community sort of stuff, but also we get to do baptisms. And this is an emerging reality that we're not talking about necessarily today, but the increase in multiracial families. That's been the direction of really the American picture of who is in at least our community in the Northwest, maybe in yours too, and that brings a different dynamic. Some folks say race doesn't matter. Race does matter if you're not the majority population, but that's not what we're talking about today, all right? Hey, these are our goals for today. We want to leave encouraged, to lead with some clarity, and I want to say simple clarity is better than having a plan. All right, simple clarity is better than having a plan. Saying I don't know or let's find out is better than thinking, okay, I'm going to make it up and appear like I know what I'm doing. All right, we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we want to equip each of us, and really the goal is to equip each other to continue leading together, never alone, and then inspire you to help people really see reality. That's the job of the leader, right? To help see reality, to find those who are doing it right, point to a better destination, and then show a better way of getting there as we join together in ministry. So, anyone know who this is? Wow. It's like he's a celebrity. Anyone know what he does? Prime Minister of Canada. Yeah. Well, Justin Trudeau, back before the pandemic in 2018, that was so long ago, said this at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The pace of change has never been this fast, yet it will never be this slow again. Would you agree? And that was 2018. Now add a traumatic pandemic in there and a global crisis, and that just accelerated the change, accelerated what already was. And this is the quote that doesn't get a lot of press, but this is what he said shortly after. You are rightly anxious about how quickly our existing business models are being disrupted. Again, this is at the World Economic Forum, all right? Still, if you're anxious, imagine the folks who aren't in this room are feeling. Imagine the folks who are not in your chairs or pews are feeling. The folks who are not in your inner circles are feeling. And he's just talking about money. He's not talking about eternal sort of impact. He's talking about the here and now. And so this can never be more important than today. So I'm curious from y'all, what changes are you seeing in your context these days? What do you see changing in your context these days? Go ahead and turn to some folks here and just share a couple. Everybody gets a chance to share a couple with some folks. Like, this is extroverted time, so introverts are just like, no. And then we'll come together, share a few, and then we'll move on. All right, go ahead. Start recording again. All right, toss out. What did you guys discuss with others? What changes are you seeing in your context?
The patterns for worship habits.
Worship habits.
Yeah, decreased.
Fantastic. So frequency of worship, or?
A person can come once a month and think they're an active member.
Got it. Sorry to break it to you, that's been happening on the West Coast for a decade. Over a decade. Yeah, exactly. Others. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like there's more and more stuff just on demand.
On demand.
So I
Yeah.
When I want, and I'll
Yeah.
on Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
dial it up, and then I'll forget about it.
Yeah. Burger King, my way, right away. Yeah, that's right. Can't have it your way, right? Yeah, maybe one more. Yeah, Mike.
I think the people that are coming back after the pandemic are more engaged. That's what
Yeah.
I'm seeing in the Northwest
Yeah.
District and the churches I visit.
Yeah.
It just seems like they're more engaged, and they're asking the question, how can we serve the community better?
Mm-hmm.
And as a LCEF VP in the Northwest,
Yeah.
we ask questions like that. How are you involved in the community? And we don't have to ask those questions
Yeah.
after the pandemic. It just seems like
Yeah.
the congregations are asking themselves.
Yeah.
Which I've only been with them 6 months,
Yeah.
but I've been in 50 churches.
Yeah.
A lot of that is going on.
Yeah.
So-
So the folks who are back are more engaged.
I believe they are. Yeah.
And that gap between those who are not engaged, seemingly they might be further disconnected. Yeah.
And I hate to say it, we have about half the people coming back at my church.
Yeah.
But I know more people
Yeah.
at my church.
Yeah.
Because
Interesting.
they're more involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
my
So really what you're saying is cultural Christianity is dying or dead in the Northwest. Yeah. This is not part of my presentation, but maybe you can take this and store it in the back of your mind. I was just in Asia for the last month, and this was kind of one of our ahas, that openness and distance are not the same. Where people are with their relationship with God and their openness to it is not the same as how far they might be from God. And I think sometimes as Americans, we put that together as Westerners, like, oh man, if you're closed, you must be far. Well, we're not seeing that. Or if you're far, you must be closed. No, we're not seeing that either. We have folks far from God, even in our own community, who are very open, and people who are closed off to even engaging in the things of God, who are probably closer than they think. They've just changed, and life's changed. And so maybe that might be a new concept, but openness and distance is not the same. And just kind of sit with that for a little bit. All right, I wonder what God sees. Anybody ask yourself that question, or ask your teams that question? With all the things that we see, I wonder what God actually sees. Go ahead and take about 3 minutes and just kind of noodle on that for a few few seconds with your group that you just talked about with. All right. What do you suppose God wants us to see? All right, let's come back together here. And I wonder what God wants us to see. Maybe just 2. And then we'll jump into the 10 realities that we're seeing. Opportunity. Good. Opportunity. Maybe one more. Yeah.
I think he wants us to see what he's doing.
Oh, what he's doing. Yeah. I used to be one of those like complainers. Anybody else with me? Like, maybe it's just the fact that I'm getting older and I don't like change as much at least as much as I thought I did, and God's just kind of convicted me like, yeah, you don't see what I see yet, and so stop your belly aching. And so maybe some of these realities that I'll highlight here today, maybe they aren't necessarily human realities that are shifting only, but maybe it's something that God's changing that is just making us a little bit uncomfortable and is forcing us to consider maybe God's doing something totally different that we don't even know. So, all right. Here's the first one. All right, we're seeing the free agent economy fully at work. We had a total staff transition. Anyone else experienced like major staff transition? And it wasn't like we're mad at you. Like usually in ministry, it's like there's conflict and then somebody takes off and then you have a fallout. It's just ugly. All of our transition was either planned retirements or transitional moves, like relocations, which was kind of weird and yet refreshing, but it still had the same outcome where you either have to hire or you have to shift or you have to restructure, right? The free agent economy plays into that, and while that's not necessarily a spiritual reality, it's a reality that impacts any system, and it's not just paid staff, it's volunteers. Anyone else challenged with their volunteer teams, like trying to rebuild, re-identify? Commitment levels used to be like, I'll serve twice a month, and now it's like, I'll serve when I want to. And then even trying to get them to say, I'll serve, it's like, I'd rather have a root canal than commit. So the Great Resignation is everywhere. And what's driving the Great Resignation, I've learned from a couple Fortune 500 CEOs that we meet with in Seattle once a year, is that it's really this drive to have this personal happiness, this personal satisfaction, something in the pandemic, and research papers will be written, dissertations will be written about this for decades, that stirred in sort of the American Western spirit of the 24-hour, 7-day a week, like working for the man. I don't have to take it. So if you think the 70s revolution was nuts, for those of you who lived through that, this is like the take it to the man work revolution. And it's very subtle because we don't like conflict, even though we find ourselves in it to a great extent. There's this drive to escape that 9 to 5. So we see a lot more remote working, right? I have half of my team would be considered 35 or younger right now because that's who applied for the jobs. And I think we pay really well, like especially for the West Coast, we pay very well. But it comes to the point in many of the interviews, and I was talking to our executive director who's sat in on many of them, about the third question in, they're asking, what can I get? Where can I work? I'm not an office person. And she gets a couple okay boomers in there. But it's just fascinating. Like, we don't remember a time when candidates would ask those questions. And at first glance, it was like, who the heck are you, right? But what's underneath that is this sense of, wow, I don't want to get into a place where I get stuck. I'm worried that I'm going to get bored, which is kind of with that fear of missing out. So all these sort of cultural trends kind of blend together to create this free agent economy. Nobody wants to be supervised, but they all want to contribute. Yeah.
Real quickly, since you're talking about the generation,
Yeah.
this sounds to me a very millennial thing.
We're finding this in all generations.
Working with millennials, I did, now Gen Z, I see a lot of
Yeah,
that
yeah. It's more pronounced, it's more articulated. But even our boomers on staff, they are they are pushing back on the even 30-hour work week. Not that they aren't working full-time, but what work used to look like. So I'll tell you this, the only meeting that meets in person in our context right now is our board of directors. 1 hour every quarter. And it's not for a lack of commitment. Like, we get stuff done. They just don't want to meet in meetings anymore. And
In Zoom if something comes up?
yeah, most of our meetings are either in Zoom or we have constant communication. I'll talk more about kind of how we've mitigated some of that structure and culture. All right. We have a lot of self-starters. How many of y'all know somebody who started something in the last 3 years? How many do you think will continue what they started? I don't know. It is kind of funny because we have this huge group of young folks who are like, yeah, I'm going to start my own nonprofit. I'm going to start my own business. And we're looking at it and we're like, y'all aren't starters. Nope. And but they're figuring it out. They're figuring out what I wish we would have figured out years ago, is that you need a team to start, not just an individual to start. Many of us got in ministry thinking, wow, it rests on the pastor or the leadership team, and what they're learning that I wish we had learned, at least in the early 2000s, those of us who kind of went through ministry training in school, is that you need an entire tribe to lead out, not just a selected few. And that's what the self-starters are teaching us, which is really encouraging. Retirees will accelerate, and the new hires will continue to lag. I don't know what it's like in your context, but we just have a lot more, we'll say, baby boomers than any other generation, and that's just the reality, specifically in our volunteer teams. 5 years is a long time. A lot of life happens. A lot of health things happen. And that's just the reality. My parents are in their 70s. They live in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they were super active in their church before the pandemic, but not because of COVID, but because of just their energy, their personal health, their desires. They have grandkids now. Like, they went from 1 grandkid to 6 grandkids. So their life has just changed, and that's the reality of older folks and retirees. It's not for a lack of desire. And I think that maybe is one reality we need to embrace, is people disconnect mostly not out of a lack of desire to connect. They want to connect. They need to figure out how best to connect in a new reality. Again, there's this difference between being open and far. The folks who you have been with and might seem a little bit more disconnected. They're probably closer than you think, but they're close because of something, either something maybe personal, or they're not shepherded in, or they're wrestling with some of this and they don't know how to make sense of it. And so you have this free agent volunteer mentality, free agent staff mentality. It all is kind of under that heading of the Great Resignation. And we're finding that new hires will transition in and out a whole lot quicker than what they used to. I think the shortest tenure of one of our support staff was 3 weeks. And yeah, that was interesting. And the average is about 6 months right now. And it's not because of performance issues, and it's not because of internal culture issues. It's because they're seeing it as a stepping stone. They have their end goal, and they're driven to meet it. And maybe it's just the folks that we enjoy hiring, but that's what we're seeing among a younger generation, at least. And it might be true among the older, too. Our executive director we hired during COVID, and she's a missionary. She doesn't relate to that sort of mentality. She's like, stay put where God's planted you until He moves you. But even her own family, within her own family, she's like, even adults are feeling that. Like, if I'm not personally happy in what I'm doing, I don't need to stay here. There's other options. So that's the first one. We won't spend that much time on all these. But here's the second one. Partnership is better. Because people can live and lead anywhere. And so you can leverage the best of the best of the best. No longer are we restricted to our local municipalities or our local regions. We are tapping into some of the best ministry strategy conversations, not here in the United States, but actually over in Asia and in Africa and in Sweden. Which is fascinating because we never thought of strategizing in ministry that way before. But the reality is everyone's thinking on a much larger global scale. And we can live and lead anywhere. We had one staff member who took off for India for 6 months and worked from India for us. And it was fantastic. And what happened was that our ministry changed because they changed. And so they were leading from a position of influence as opposed to physical presence. And that shaped our communication. It forced us to rethink, so how do we connect with people who are thousands of miles away, who do want to connect, but they don't necessarily have a place locally where they can connect, at least yet. Ideas and impact flow through the organization. So vertically, not top down. Anyone familiar with Airbnb? Anyone know what their organizational structure is? It looks like a web. It is not a hierarchical structure, and we're experimenting with this right now. We are about to move in about 2 months from a hierarchical structure to a web. We're equipping our directors right now to make that shift. And what that looks like is that you are accountable to your teams. It's internal self-accountability. Which is a really big risk for us because we're not sure how that works out with LCMS Inc. with rostered workers, but you know what? We don't really care. We care, just not that much. How about that? And so and the reason we're making that shift is because we're seeing that influence is leading at a greater pace than hierarchy. The days of pastoral authority within your ministry team, at least in our context, it's not that they don't respect authority, it's that they know authority blows smoke most of the time. Because pastors, we don't know really what we're doing, right? Oftentimes as leaders, we don't know what we're doing. And they're finding that, and I'm finding that, honestly, I'm asking them for more input. I'm asking them for more wisdom. I'm asking them for more collaboration. And they're like, so why don't we just organize around what we're actually doing, which is sort of the self-accountability, self-organization. So if you want to see kind of some of the drafts of that, I'm happy to share that. Just don't publish it online, please, or at least put my name to it. All right. Local leadership pipelines, university experiences in churches, local partnerships with community colleges. We've experienced this, that folks are not moving away. Anyone else find that? Like folks are, at least they aren't moving far. And part of that's economics, but partnering with local community colleges, university, we partner with actually Concordia University online for a lot of classes. And what happens is that they can get a degree, they can hang out, they can serve with us as part of that program, and we can raise up leaders who won't leave very quickly. So we're finding this, especially in our worship world, with musicians. The creative types, if you will. And it's really fun because they get to express and lead and to be a part of sort of applied learning while getting a degree. And it is so fun. It is so fun. And then we get to put a little stamp of approval that they have an internship, and then they get to add that to their resume, and they're just tickled pink. But it's not limited to worship. We have folks going into business, advertising. Our best graphic folks are not paid staff. They're folks who are in graphic design, who share a project, who add it to their portfolio, and we have people who don't really know who Jesus is, helping them make designs, and they get to share Jesus through that experience. It's pretty fun. So, and that's all in terms of outsourcing skill. No longer needs to be in-house. We at Our Savior, we built a team back in the mid-2000s where everything had to be in-house. Our print shop was in-house, our design was in-house, worship was in-house, everything was in-house. We're finding that a lot of that can be outsourced for, one, a whole lot cheaper, and two, missionally, we can connect with a much broader spectrum of people, which is really fun. It just affirms that the priesthood of all believers is alive and well. And I think the more we can move away from the thinking that only staff and trained workers can do certain things, and into the priesthood of all believers, I think we're going to find that God has already been doing something in the hearts and lives of people we didn't necessarily expect, which is really fun. All right. So, yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the team part,
Mhm.
so how did all the teams know what the other team's doing? So there's got to be some structure.
Yeah.
Is there like a board, or how does that, all the team leaders are in a board?
On staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way that we have begun that shift is we have what we call a ministry integration meeting. And that is everybody who is on a team is welcome to that, but we require all of our directors and ministers to be at that. So our support staff can join, volunteers can join. It's just an open meeting where each person, we start with the check-in, and our executive pastor leads this meeting, so thank God. But I get to just encourage and coach through folks. So we go around and we just share kind of personal updates. This is where our head's at for the next 2 weeks. And then it's quick informational items. That's usually for me. And then we drill down into some skill that right now it's like how do you build a volunteer team, rebuild that. And that's all we do at that meeting. All the calendaring stuff, we use Planning Center Online. That's collaborative outside of that meeting. And if there's a conflict, we'll have to work through it. But that's more on a team level than all level. And then we have our executive team, which is our directors team. And that's the team I meet with weekly for about 45 minutes. And that's more high level, like structured staffing, supervision, that sort of stuff.
So there is a top down, but the work is being at the team.
Correct. Like everybody knows who the authority is. It's that we don't the evaluations all happen in teams. Like it's a team evaluation. It's not a supervisor evaluation. Yeah. Cool. All right. Healthy culture. I hear there was a couple sessions about healthy culture. This goes for staff and volunteers. This is some trends that we're finding. All right, relational intelligence is no longer preferred, it's now required. If you're a jerk, everybody knows you're a jerk, and they just avoid you as a jerk. Even if you don't know you're a jerk. And if you don't know you're a jerk, you might be the jerk, all right? It's critical in retaining talent. Volunteers will not stick around very long with you if they're just doing a job. So we learned this through our frontlines teams. When we came back from COVID, we just sort of adapted that same culture of if you want to be part of our hospitality frontline team, then here's some bulletins and smile and open the door. You know how many of those folks on those volunteer teams stuck around longer than a month? None. We were kind of in that crisis, and we were just restarting, and we're like, there's nobody to do the work. We were talking to some folks actually on the east coast of Canada, and they said, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try asking them to be a part of helping people connect with Jesus? And the way you're going to do that is by welcoming and greeting, and you can do that however you want. You know how many people signed up for that and said, I'm game for that? You had about 50 the first week. And that goes into the culture piece where Whereas that relational intelligence, typically those who are relationally attuned bubble up to those type of invitations, which is what we always wanted, but we thought, oh, we just need to get the task done, so smile and give them a bulletin. Well, it was never about the bulletin to begin with. So now our bulletins just kind of sit on a table, and if people want them, they can get them. Most of our stuff's online anyway, which is nice. Save on paper. People quiet quit before we can manage it. Anybody experience that in volunteers? It's like, where are they? They just aren't seemingly checked in. That's a trend that we're seeing. I don't know what to do with that, but that's a trend we're seeing. Spiritual matters are not the primary motivation for most people. Did you know that? Back in 2017, even before the pandemic, and then they retested, resurveyed after the pandemic in 21, North Point Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia, Andy Stanley, they surveyed their volunteer base and asked, why do you volunteer? Why do you serve? In 2017, only about half of them said it was for a spiritual reason. Most of them said it was just to make new friends or because I enjoy it, like personal satisfaction. 2021, how many folks do you think said it was spiritual? 5. Greatest reason? I want to meet new people. That's all it was. I want to meet new people. And we saw that. We're like, oh, I thought that happens over coffee and donuts. Well, maybe for an extrovert. But what we found was that most introverts, that's how they feel like they're meeting new people, is by serving. Give me something to do alongside somebody else. Might not talk to them, but I feel as if I am connecting. And for introverts, you know this, that is how you feel like you're connecting. If you're doing something together. You might not have the deep heart-to-heart conversation, look somebody in the eye and have this moment right away. But over time, that's what you'll experience. But spiritual matters are not a primary motivation for most people. That might be something you want to ask your volunteer teams. And that's just part of a healthy culture is having that open dialogue with your teams. Why do you serve? And if it's not for a spiritual reason, that doesn't discount anything. It just is. And so how do you meet people where they're at? And you might actually find a key to unlock a whole new group of people who want to get engaged, who want to get connected, because your culture is going to be healthier. You're not going to force them into spiritual marinism. All right. Career, community, and cause, they're all integrated. Work must matter. What people do must matter. What people volunteer with must matter. Your boards must matter. They have to do more than look at reports and sign off on a budget. Give them something to do. Invite them into the exciting things that you get to do, because guess what? You're not the only one doing it. And that's a great way to build your board and your leadership capacity, inviting non-board and non-leadership into what you're doing, because you can kind of build that rapport and be like, hey, you'd be a really good whatever. And that goes into that healthy culture too, always looking for the person that God is already working in and inviting them along. Make sense? So, all right, we'll speed through these next couple. The removal of the middleman. Anyone else like farm-to-table stuff? Direct service, like I don't want to talk to the person in wherever, the call center. I want to talk to the person. So that's why I share my call, text, email, and social. Not that anybody's going to call me, but it's that sense of accessibility. So it's the removal of the middleman. All these folks, all these businesses have done that. So you call their customer service, you're going to get not a recording, but somebody alive and most likely in your region. I had an issue with my flight overseas, and I called from my phone, and you know who I got on the other line right away? Somebody in Portland, Oregon. From Singapore. I'm like, oh, great. Because they knew, based on my phone number, where I was from. And I was shocked. I was thinking I was going to get somebody from Singapore and like have to navigate that whole thing, but it was fantastic. It was fantastic. So even global companies have figured out how to route connections in your local community. And so what does that look like for ministry? How do you remove the middleman from every connection that you have? How do you give access to the people who lead? I had to kick some of our folks out of the office. Like, they don't need your middleman. They don't need a secretary. They don't need to call the church office. Give them your phone number. Doesn't mean you have to answer it. That's a whole nother talk, by the way. Doesn't mean you have to answer it right away. But do people have access to you? Because they don't really want the stuff you got unless they can get access to you. Again, it's the relationship that people are craving. All right. Mental wellness. We're seeing trends all over here. Constant anxiety. Yeah. It's this need for healthy rhythms, the ability to say no. What we're finding is that ministry cultures that have the ability and the vocabulary to address mental health, they're growing. Maybe not numerically, but most of them numerically, but certainly in the depth of their relationships, of their families, of their ministry. Acknowledging, yeah, if people stress you out, that's okay. And saying it's okay, verbalizing where folks are at mentally is okay, goes a long ways. That's what we're finding. All right. All right, find 4 to 6 people right now. Share your name, your contact information. Give them access. 1, 2, 3, go. Introverts are rolling their eyes at me once again. You can make up your phone number if you want. Here's your homework assignment. Go ahead and reach out to the people that you just shared that with. Check in with them in a week. Ask them how it's going. All right, can you do that? Yeah? We're putting some of this into practice. All right? By the way, this is a great exercise with your teams, with your board, or even with that new person who might not be as close to Jesus as you thought. Make sure you have each other's contact information and loop back around with them. Share, hey, what are you seeing happening in life? It's a great discipling question. All right? All right, we'll get through the last 5 here pretty quickly. More generations in the room. Anyone else feeling this? Especially those of us who teach on a regular basis, this is getting more and more complex and more fun all at the same time. Never before have we had 7 generations all together. And the reason is new generations tend to be shorter in time span because technology changes the way groups of people think at a quicker pace. All right? And so it's not that we have necessarily a whole lot of people, living a whole lot longer, but that's a dynamic as well. So how do you connect with great-great-great-grandma as well as your 3-year-old who runs up in the middle of church and wants to play the guitar in the middle of the service? It's a great question. It's a great question. But that's a reality. Anyone familiar with Kara Powell? Kara Powell down at Fuller Youth Institute. If you have not checked out Growing Young, oh my goodness, it'll be a game changer for you and your leadership. And if you do have some dollars, not an advertisement, but it is an advertisement, go ahead and purchase a cohort, at least for you. It will change and help bring some understanding into some of the changes among generations. What's very, very fascinating, you know what? One of the leading indicators of lifelong faith is intergenerational worship. When all generations worship together. When I came to Our Savior, I met with a couple of young adult groups because they were just hanging out. And I asked them, hey, I see you around here during the week, serving, doing some really great things, but I don't see you around on Sunday. What's up with that? And I was expecting them to say, I go to another church. No. One of them was bold enough to say, Pastor, we never went to church as a kid. Why would we begin going to church now? I'm like, huh? And come to find out, they had never, like this individual literally had never been in worship on a Sunday morning. Because they were in nursery, and they went to Sunday school, they went to youth, which was during church on Sunday, then they traveled on holidays. But it wasn't a fault of their parents necessarily, solely. We set up a structure and a culture that actually celebrated that. Which, thankfully for COVID, we totally shifted out of that program structure where actually now we have an intergenerational worship time. They still have their kids' time, but we structured it a little differently to facilitate a lot of this. And actually Kara Powell and the conversations we had with our growing young community really helped shape what that could be. All right. So how do you speak to more than one generation in the room? Which is really the shift, right? That's really the shift. Adult services, we can just kind of go with it. When you have kids in the room, how do you... anyone here preach longer than 25 minutes? All right, one.
Mine does.
Yours does? I met an LCMS pastor who preaches for 50 minutes.
Oh my God.
And they love it. They love it. No. That's the session after this one, all right? How long should your sermon be?
Come on, Spanky, get to the point.
It's a great question, right? More generations in the room. It gives you the opportunity to be raw and real in appropriate ways. You have to remove the hype and get right to it. And it's fun because you got to keep all generations engaged. You can go deep and challenge people in appropriate ways, and so scaffolding. Any educators in here? Educators, you know what scaffolding is, right? I wish educators you could teach that to every preacher, how to scaffold the message. If you don't know what that is, find a teacher and they'll help you. All right.
Say that again. What is it?
Scaffolding. Realizing that everyone in the room is in a different place, and how do you give access to the same information in different ways in a condensed period of time. Message matters more than style, worship folks. The message of what you do matters more than style. And if you need proof, just kind of click online and read what's going on in Asbury, Ohio right now. And then connect the story, not the style. What we're finding the trend is nobody cares about our worship style. Nobody. Now, if you're in the Midwest, that's probably very different. But West Coast, like, you ain't there because of the style. You're there because you follow Jesus, because nobody else around you follows Jesus. And so they're looking for a connecting story. This was interesting. We shifted in 2014 to all contemporary worship. And at that time, they were thinking, on one, practicality, just our traditional services had gone to a point where they were just not sustainable size-wise. But what they really discovered about 5 years later when I came on, they said, people really don't care about style. What they cared about was the fact that more of their friends were at these services than those services. And they had a connecting story of Jesus.
But that's because you already moved, you got the first problem solved. You went to the contemporary.
Oh yeah, I mean they've been doing contemporary since the '60s. So yeah, actually, fun fact that we kind of laugh about. I learned that our Savior was the first church to have weekly contemporary services in Missouri Synod. So Art Langdon, that was years ago. Yeah, yeah, connecting story, story of God, and story of our present circumstance.
And week in, week out, too.
Yes. Week in and week out. So anyone familiar with Discovery Bible Study? Just tell the story again. What does it have to do with God? What do you learn about What do you learn about humanity? What do you learn about yourself? Who else needs to hear it? It's that process over and over and over again. We actually invite all of our confirmation students from 5th to 8th grade to story the entire Bible. So by the time they leave junior high, they may not have read the entire Bible, which we're like, that's not really our goal for them to read the entire Bible, but they've storied through the entire Bible with another adult, which is really fun.
I
Yeah.
think that goes with the, people want to hear your story. That became the thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to a website, you get a recipe, they have to tell you the story of
Yeah.
the recipe,
I-
how it affects them, and you're like, I just want
Yeah.
Just want the recipe.
Yeah.
But is it the same?
I think it's that, and I think it's also a little bit deeper than that, and
Yeah, they want to know why you're doing it.
it's sort of a rebellion against rationalism. Like for Gen Xers, rebellion, we like rebellion. The rebellion against rationalism, like I can learn A, B, C, and D and ace the test of the Jesus stuff, but your life doesn't tell me a thing about Jesus. So tell me a story. How is it actually working for you?
I think about this of like where I connect most with pastors who teach is when they are vulnerable and share their own struggles from the front, and it's like, oh, I'm not so bad, right?
Yeah.
Like I won't be in timeout in heaven as much as what I think. Anyway, but like there's that connection that you have, and it's like you're all on the same playing field.
Yeah. Part of that's a relatability, which actually goes to our next piece here, authenticity. Authenticity about, we haven't been good at some things. Back in 2000, one of my first challenges was navigating the George Floyd murder. And how do you talk about that as a mixed race community, as a white church, as a Korean pastor? Authenticity matters. Yeah. Just, it wasn't a lot of apologizing, but it was a lot of, I don't know. This sucks. I don't have the answers. That went a long ways for a while. But then it was, so what are you going to do about that? And it was a lot of personal soul searching, to tell you the truth. On our leaders, it was a lot of time just lamenting, and honestly, it was a lot of tears because we had realized that we've reached the people who were already reached, but the folks who so wanted to be close to Jesus, they didn't feel like they could be a part of it. And we had to be honest about that. And that goes into authenticity. Being real is replacing the cultural value of excellence. That doesn't mean that you suck, all right? My friend Rob says, authenticity is one thing, but worship can't suck, all right? But being real during it, it's important. Small is the new big. Smaller worship gatherings. We had a joke at a recent pastors' conference. It used to be, hey, how big is your church? Oh, about 300. We said we have to lower that number now. Hey, how big is your church? About 50. And so everybody, we just kind of agreed, if you get that question, how big's your church? We agreed on the number 100, like about 100. So everybody was in the same playing field. But it kind of goes back to this trend that we're seeing is that we know our worship communities are smaller. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. But how do you multiply multiple smaller worship communities? It might mean that you have to equip and train and send out some people. Why? Because there's a lack of trust in large organizations. We find that in our largest worship communities, we're a large church. We worship about 900 on a weekend. People distrust us, even within the church, because we're a large church. Every time, like the Matt Chandler thing, if Texas folks and folks who read about that, that hit us hard. because we have so many Acts 29 churches around connected with Matt, and of course we have Mars Hill and Mark. And if you've read or if you've listened to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church on Christianity Today, fascinating stuff. That's like our life and our context around us in Christian land on the West Coast, or at least in the Puget Sound. My elders said, what do we do when people don't trust you and when people don't trust us as a church because of things like this? And we do have that. So being authentic and saying, yeah, we are just as susceptible to that type of behavior as anybody else. It matters. Customized culture, making it personal. Things that don't scale are what people need. We're seeing that trend more and more. So how do you make it a personalized experience when you first visit a church? We're seeing this more on the visitor guest end than anywhere else. But even on our discipleship pathway, when folks do choose to commit to a church, how do you make it personal? It takes more time for some of our ministry leaders, but they get a personal dinner, and we just budget that in and say, hey, we'll take you out to Starbucks. We aren't going to take you out for steak, but we'll take you out for breakfast. We'll take you out for a sandwich. Making it personal and just spending time together goes a long way. We hear time and time again, people have been so blown away that someone who is perceivedly busy all the time took an hour to share a coffee and just shoot the breeze and not like try to sell them something or like, hey, we need you to serve on this group. No, just, hey, tell me about your family. Oh, your kids go to what school? Oh, that's really cool. What are they involved in? Hey, here's a picture of my kids. Here's a picture of my grandkids. I don't have kids, but I wish I could have kids someday. It's fantastic. It goes a whole lot further than you think, and we're seeing that trend more and more to where that's becoming contagious. Why? Because your heart will always be seen and your fruit will always find you. That might be something you file away. Your heart will always be seen whether you acknowledge it or not, and the fruit will always find you. The outcomes will always be the outcome based upon your behavior. All right, everybody's a storyteller. We kind of talked about that a little bit. If you have a phone, you're a scriptwriter. Yep. Think Yelp, social media, and that story could be a good story or it could be a bad story. Or it could be an indifferent story. Or it could be the wrong story, right? It could be the wrong story. This is more of a trend that you can't necessarily control because you can't control the narrative. But it does make you rethink how and what you do. Because people will always share a story. People will always share their experience. People, if you're just curious, go on Google and read what people have said about you on Google. That's humbling, in good and bad. And by the way, if somebody posts a negative comment about you on Facebook, don't delete it. Respond to it prayerfully, because there's probably some truth in it somewhere. And people will sniff out fakes pretty fast if you go through and delete like some large church organizations do. No personal commentary there. All right. And it's just another example of death to hierarchy. No longer is it the top leaders that control the narrative. It's everybody gets to contribute to that narrative. So if you go on to social media, if you go on to Yelp, if you go on to any sort of group, if you think that's the only place people are sharing those comments and that feedback, you're probably living in a vacuum. Folks are sharing that in their workplaces, with their friends, certainly with their own families. Everybody's a storyteller. All right. Curator culture, this is more for those who are in the teaching, preaching world. This is something that our pastors have noticed, that we're in a curator culture. And what we mean by that is that we feel as if teaching's become more of a gallery than a studio. We don't feel like we need to be as creative as we once needed to be. Come up with the latest and greatest message series or because we're finding that the best stuff is the stuff that we're gathering. We're becoming more like art gallery curators. Like, I found this YouTube video. How does that fit in and support the message we want to communicate? We're finding that more and more. Echoes are just as influential as creators today. If you're wondering how that works, jump on Twitter, jump on Instagram, share, like, echo. And while that may be perceived as a not so good thing, getting caught up in an echo chamber, when it's the Jesus message, let's be honest, the Jesus message has been echoed for thousands of years. So put it in that context, all right? But curators. And here's, I think it's the last one. Yeah, it's the last one. Hybrid is here to stay. This is something that I humbly encourage you to consider. How do people grow relationships and build community online in digital ways? I know that seems repulsive to some. That seems confusing and antithetical to others. What we have found out is that about half of our people have chosen to stay online. And it's not because of laziness. Actually, if you start going around saying people who stay online are lazy or taking the easy way, that's about as offensive as saying that you worship Satan. Because what we find in our context, and that's not discounting, there might be some who take the easy way, okay? Not all, it's not a generalization, but most of the folks that we've talked to are online, and we get to know folks online through our platforms. They're homebound, they are immunocompromised, they have different priorities, but again, they're open, so it's not that, hey, everybody has to be on the spiritual Marine Corps. They're just in a different place, and we have to acknowledge that. But they're here, and they're engaged. And what we find is that some of our largest and generous people with their time, and the people who are actually reaching people who are far from God, are worshiping online, not in person. Yeah, people who are worshiping online in our context, we're finding more and more is that they are reaching people far from God, more so than the people who show up on Sunday morning. And this is just sort of armchair anthropology based on a short survey that we did back in the fall. People in the pew have talked about Jesus to one person that they think does not know Jesus less than 0.3 times. People online, because we asked, do you primarily worship online or in person? They've talked to an average of 5 people. And usually it's because they've shared something, they've invited somebody over for breakfast during worship. They're using that as what we would consider an evangelistic platform. Which is fascinating because we didn't equip them for that. We didn't do anything for that. It's just what they did, which is fascinating. There needs to be more processing about how to work that. But hybrid is here to stay, I believe. The home is the new frontier. Online is your front door, if you want to think about it like that. Integration. Think about it. We already live in a hybrid culture. If you have a smartphone, you're in a hybrid culture. If you have a smartphone and you're married, you're definitely in a hybrid culture, all right? Because nobody has a marriage that's completely online. But how many of you have texted a spouse or a child in the last 24 hours?
During this session?
Yeah, you live in a hybrid life, man. Live in a hybrid life. Yeah, that's the only way you engage. But these are the 2 words that we want to walk away with all this, is adaptability and flexibility. And so let's just wrap it up. All right. Which trend do you see clearest in your context? Just kind of throw it out. What sort of resonated with you here today?
The interesting thing, that picture of children.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, we discovered our children's ministry is larger online than in person.
Is
And that scared me incredibly. What one of our staff members said, maybe we should stop providing such good tools online. That thought was, oh, we need to get kids back again.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, do you realize
Yeah.
that this is getting passed on from family to
Yeah.
family, that we have no
Yeah.
clue
Yeah.
who those people are who are engaging
Yeah.
online. They're not those
Yeah.
members of the church.
Yeah.
It's being shared.
Yeah. Yeah. Back to who? Back to you or back to Jesus? Because it seems like they're pretty close to Jesus at this point. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you expound on what happens after someone does connect with you online?
Yeah.
Is it a number of people that are constantly?
So we move them into a life group right away once we find out somebody's online. So I'll give you an example. Down in Southern California, there was a couple of folks, they were actually family members of folks who lived up in Tacoma, so their kids were connected. So little unique situation, but nonetheless, they're thousands of miles away. They said, "Hey, what's up? We believe the local church is the best expression for you, but we understand you might not be in a place for a variety of reasons for that." We connect them into a life group, and so we talked to some trusted other ministry leaders down there in the Orange County area and asked, hey, is there a life group they can connect with other people? And they said, actually, we have some folks who are kind of in similar situations that we'd love to connect them with. They don't necessarily attend their church either. So they're all kind of in the same boat. But then what we do with this individual couple is we equip them to lead as one of our life groups, just in a different place. And so our somebody on our team is constantly in communication, walking with them. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Are they doing this connection online?
They're doing it all online.
So they create themselves a group or what sorts, and then it's a
I mean, they use Zoom.
oh, I see what you say. Oh, they use Zoom. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The gentleman, Gary, he's connected to one of our guys' life groups as well, online. But they actually host worship in their home for their neighborhood. So we have like 40 people in Southern California who don't necessarily go to church, who are not connected anywhere. Now, our dream is that they get connected to a local church or they start a church down there. That's our end goal, because we don't believe online only is the best. We believe hybrid's the best. That's different than what we probably would have said at the beginning of the pandemic when we said in-person's the best. So we're even changing kind of how we see that. Hybrid's the best because that's where life happens for all of us. Yeah.
We had kind of a fun outcome post-COVID. So at our church, my husband's a pastor, and we live streamed before COVID. So when that hit, we were equipped. But we were going down to St. Louis to my husband's reunion at the Sound, and stopped for gas in Litchfield. You that knows St. Louis, it's
Yep.
almost there. And Randy went in, it came out after paying for gas, and an older lady, so it's not just the young folks that are doing online, an older lady, older than us, said, "Are you," and used Randy's name, and he said, "Yeah," and you're wondering, did they look at my license plate, what have I done wrong? He said, "No, we've been watching the Bible study that you
Yeah.
and Carl have been doing forever, because we watch that, we watch the first service on Sundays, but then we go to our own church." So the older folks are using it to get more ministry, not prefer
Yeah.
ministry.
Yep. Yep.
The trend that really resonated with me was the healthy culture. Like the stuff you said about volunteers. We are totally seeing that. It's not that they don't want to be there, but they're having health issues. They're having
Yep.
older generation. Their parents are starting to get sick, and they have to take care of them. So they're stepping back from leadership. And we're like, what
Yep.
just happened? And it was very quick, like
Yep.
within a month or two.
Yep.
So that was really, for you to say that, I was like, okay, it's not just our area.
Yep. With that, I do believe commitment levels are different between generations and the understanding of what commitment means, but it doesn't mean that a lower commitment by a younger generation is necessarily wrong. It's how do we adapt and meet them where they're at, and what does commitment for this next season look like? And I think that's a challenge for us, not necessarily for them.
And well, yeah, and they feel bad, you know. They're and like, you know, you gotta take care of yourself. This is a transition. You know, it's just being open to them.
Yeah. My junior higher is in choir, and he has a concert on Ash Wednesday, and he has a performance on Maundy Thursday. And this is the pastor's family. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a transition pastor.
Yeah.
And work with congregation, and the congregation that I'm working with right now, just going through the call process, that kind of thing. And even with the transition task force that I work with, we had multi-generation on it, but the place where it really hit for them was when they started saying, okay, where are we going to put this information out? Or how are we going to put this information out? And one of the Gen Xers says, your bulletin, your newsletter, and your email won't work for our generation. We're texting. You know, figure out a way where you can text this information to every member of your congregation who has a cell phone. And we're going, what? You know, it was a shocker for the task force and others. Where he says no, because most churches work with newsletters, bulletins, and email. And he says you're going to lose, or you're not going to touch 50% of your congregation if you do just that. And you got to figure out other ways to communicate all of this stuff. If you're, you know, in a church going through a call process, needs to communicate with every member that they can. And so they're struggling yet to figure out how are we going to do. How do you do a mass texting for a whole congregation, or for a significant part of your congregation that won't hear it any other way, see it any other way?
Yep.
And those kinds of challenges are unique, I think, to now.
Well, and there's some legal pieces with that as well that churches are not exempt from. So just layers upon layers, and all that's changing as well. Yeah. Good. Cool. Yeah. Josh.
I'm seeing the authenticity part. So I'm in a new call just recently, and opening up and having people come up afterwards and saying, I've never heard a pastor be raw. I've never heard him share the challenges that you're going through, or you're a real person. So it's kind of breaking that barrier, breaking that connection spot where it's one of the things that I've heard just recently is pastors often come up and say you do this, you do that. I haven't heard you say you, I've heard you say we or us. And so it's connecting, from pulpit to view, to see, and saying, we're in the same spot.
Yep. Yep.
It's generational. It's not one generation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I promised some tools. If you want to take a picture of this, again, this will be up online. OSLC.com/BPM if you want to find it. OSLC.com/BPM. These are some books that our team has been working through over the last 18 months. If there's one that I would point out that will really be powerful is The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. She's New York Times, not a Christian. She has a podcast as well. It really shifted the way that we saw community, not just being built, but how it's sustained and why people choose to connect with people. Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering. There's some blog, some voice things, and some email tools. If you're looking at staying connected on trends outside of ministry that affect ministry, morningbrew.com is my go-to. Every morning they send out kind of economic, business, education, kind of the rundown of trends. A lot of it recently has been Elon Musk, which Yeah, take it or leave it. I will say Elon Musk and Twitter is probably a bigger culture shift just across the board than what anybody thinks. That's just my commentary as of right now. I think it's going to affect a lot of things in the social media world more than anybody thinks. Not because it's Elon Musk, but because of the way it's rolling out. And there's some podcast tools. If there's one that I would point out, if you're into like leadership stuff, Craig Rochelle is one of my go-tos that I really encourage you to check out. How Leaders Lead with David Novak. That's a newer one that I've connected with. It's been around for a little while, but it's well worth your while if you're working with volunteer teams, especially How Leaders Lead. All right.
What's the website again?
Yeah.
OSLC/BPM. Yes. Yes, OSLC.com/BPM. The website will be up in about 15 minutes after we wrap up here. All right? So, let's do it. Just as we're wrapping up here, what are you taking away? What do you leave behind? Go ahead and turn to the folks that you've shared with all morning long so far, and just real quick, a couple takeaways, a couple leaving behinds. All right, real quick. Two takeaways. Hybrid.
Yeah.
One more.
What's that?
Relationships and teams. Learning to adapt. Yeah, that's good. Intergenerational worship is one of the leading indicators of lifelong faith formation. Yeah. Cool. Anything you're leaving behind?
They have to come in the door.
They got to come in the door. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out for a little while this morning. That's my contact information. If you want to reach out and have more conversation or dig deeper if you have specific questions, or if you think something is bunk, let me know. It could just be us.